All right, welcome back. Episode 4. I'm Turn.
I'm Bark.
It's still going to be a long time. So today's topic, Mr. Barker, after getting in World War II, we discussed and we decided on the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. So why don't you go ahead and start us off? What are we talking about here?
So the 442nd Regimental Combat Team was a unit that was predominantly Japanese American fighting in World War II. The thing that makes that interesting is the fact that the United States government had put Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants in internment camps because they couldn't be trusted. And then these, I think it ends up being 14,000 soldiers serve in the armed forces in Europe. They're not allowed to serve in the Pacific theater, protecting the country that essentially took away their freedom.
And, what's interesting about this is, so basically, like Barker said, President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, which is basically anything that needs to be done to handle the Japanese can be done. And one of the things that's really important here that obviously we need to point out here, there's no executive order dealing with German Americans. So, again, Japanese look different than the predominant race of Caucasian. So, therefore, they're the ones that are targeted here and can't be trusted. This is going to be a unit made up of majority of Hawaiian soldiers to start off with. So when other Japanese Americans are relocated, Hawaii actually doesn't do that because their population is made up of a good chunk of Japanese Americans that are their labor force. And so the economy of Hawaii would have tanked had they actually enforced the idea that we're not going to allow Japanese Americans and we're gonna try and put them in camps, basically.
Yeah, so if you look at the map behind me, it shows you kind of the darker color on the coastline is the area where they actually removed Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants and then relocated them to the little red dots, which are the internment camps, or the people nowadays are starting to call them concentration camps because it by definition of concentration camp, free of what we associate it with the Holocaust, it does meet the definition. But anyway, what's interesting about Washington is if you notice up there, it looks like somebody, like squiggled down the middle of Washington, where every other state has a more kind of like cohesive line, and that's because they use the Columbia River. And if you were west of the Columbia River, you had to relocate, but Japanese Americans living on the eastern bank of the Columbia didn't have to relocate, which made things rather interesting in the Yakima Valley, where there actually was a large number of Japanese immigrants working in the fields.
Again, my hometown on the Puyallup, so that was one of the things we always learned as we would go through our school, and they had the cool museum downtown. It was called Carson Air Museum, and it was so funny because my dad always says, like, "Oh, this was my gymnasium," and I was like, "Yes, Dad, I've heard this joke every time you come and chaperone this field trip." But we would go down there, and they would talk about how our fairgrounds, the Puyallup Fair, was actually a holding area, as you can see on the map. That's the assembly center for that region. I mean, so if you think about it, you're talking about probably Japanese Americans all the way up to the Canadian border, all the way down through Seattle and everything like that. And again, high population from Asia because, again, easy immigration center for them. So.
Yeah, and so as we talk about the military unit, like Turner said, a lot of them come from Hawaii initially, but by the end of it, 62% of all of the soldiers that serve in this unit, 60% of the people that were interned, were actually U.S. citizens. So, like, they should have had legal rights, habeas corpus, protection of private property, but they were forced to sell their businesses and all of that and go into these camps. And the old adage of the Issei, the first generation that had immigrated to the United States, was that the nail that stands up is the one that gets beaten down. So essentially, like, kind of the mentality of that ethnic group in America was you respect the government, you do what you're told, and you do your best when you're allowed to do it. And so a lot of these young men like saw this opportunity to go fight and prove that they actually were, because the people that actually fought in the unit, none of them were Issei, none of them were like immigrants. They were all what's called Nisei, which means that they were actually born in the United States to Japanese immigrant parents. And so like they went and fought kind of like out of a sense of duty to show the country that they were actually loyal to the United States.
And again, like you brought up before, like we were talking about the racism part of it, because again, looking different than Caucasian, these people are basically told you don't get what you've earned or what you've worked for. You're coming here, you're coming with us. And one of the things is there are a lot of people that take advantage of Japanese Americans because Japanese Americans want to get something for their businesses, and a lot of them will basically be taken for next to nothing. It's really quite unfortunate. And then after the war, again, it doesn't really happen. Formal apology. Do you remember when the formal apology comes down?
They get the formal apology in 1988 from Reagan, so about 50 years after everything's said and done.
Yeah. So again, 50 years.
You only got a monetary reparation if the person who was interned was alive. So if your parent had been in the camp and you were born afterward and your parent had passed away, your family received no monetary reparation. You had to actually be somebody who had lived through the experience and still be alive in 1988.
Yeah, and again, just talking about adults and things like that, a lot can happen between that time. So the unit actually is what's interesting about it, with it, not only the story of these people that are willing to, risk their lives for a country that treats them like crap, is this will go on to be, by Department of Defense standards, the most decorated unit in United States military history. They have 18, they account for about, what was it? You had the number.
18,143 different awards.
Yeah. And what's the unit itself earned 8 presidential unit citations. There are 21 members of this group that are awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest award our military bestows upon somebody. 52 Distinguished Service Cross, 1 Distinguished Service Medal, 560 Silver Stars with 28 Oak Leaf Clusters. And for those of you who don't know, Oak Leaf Cluster means that a person earned the award the second time. And then 22 Legion of Merit Medals, 15 Soldier Medals, 4,000 Bronze Stars with 1,200 Oak Leaf Clusters. And then this is a big number, 9,486 Purple Hearts. Purple Heart is awarded to anyone who is wounded or killed in military service.
Yeah, they said that they figured that the initial 4,000 soldiers that were there were replaced 2.5 times, bringing the total of people that served in the unit to 14,000, but not all at one time. After they start in Italy, and then they go and they fight in the Vosges Mountains, which is kind of in between Germany and France. They rescue a lost Texas battalion, the Alamo Battalion, when they luckily fared better than the Alamo. Maybe we'll cover that later in another video. And then they go back and they kind of wrap up their service in Italy again with something called the Gothic Line, where the commanders thought it would take them weeks to break through this defensive barrier that was set in the northern kind of mountains on the coast of Italy. And they do it within 12 hours. They come through and they break and they fight back a German counterattack. And one of the generals wants to meet the unit. And after the battle, he says, he's sitting there and he's looking at the unit and he looks at the commander and he says, well, why did you send so many of your guys out on errands? I wanted to come congratulate your men. And the commander essentially looks at the general and goes, this is all I have left. These are the people that are left that are not in the hospital, not getting taken care of because they've been injured. So they really did do a great job of, I guess kind of like, their motto is go for broke, coming from it. Apparently it comes from craps players in Hawaii where you just bet all your money, So, I mean, it's kind of they really kind of embodied that motto in their war record.
Super impressive. I got to do a full report on them in college, and it was really interesting to like really delve deep into the stories. And what's interesting is the awards that they're given. You read them and you go through, and it's like took out a machine gun nest by himself, 4 machine gun nests by himself, 3 machine gun. I mean, just that selfless. I mean, that go for broke attitude, like you just talked about. That selflessness, just going for it. The other thing is this unit produces actually a senator from Hawaii that will go on to be pretty prestigious, and that's Daniel Inouye. Served in Congress. I'm not sure how long, but it's a fairly distinguished career, if I remember correctly. And lastly, in 2010, that unit is actually honored by the United States by receiving the Congressional Gold Medal in 2010.
And the thing I would like to point out is that during World War II, I'm going to throw some big words at you. There's Nippanophobia, which, if you're familiar with Japanese, Nippon is the actual Japanese word for Japan. So that essentially just means people being afraid of Japanese people. And it wasn't just Japanese people. It was anybody who looked, quote unquote, Asian, because Americans are terrible at telling ethnicities apart. And there's even a Korean American guy that serves in this unit, and he was told the first time that he enlisted that he didn't look like a soldier, so he couldn't be a soldier. He could be a cook or a mechanic, but he couldn't be a soldier because of the way he looked. But I mean, they stood up against that systematic kind of racism that was happening at the time, and it just reminds me right now that we're not in a war right now with the coronavirus. But a lot of stuff on social media is coming out where it's like, where we're praising people in America for standing up and like kind of coming together and supporting the country. And then they're like, take that, China. And it's like, China didn't do this on purpose. It just started there. You know what I mean? So I think we really have to like caution ourselves right now from xenophobia, which is afraid of things that are Chinese. Even though we're not in a war, the president's using verbiage where he's saying he's a wartime president. We're at war with the virus, and we're starting to use some of these kind of like, well, it's the Wuhan virus, it's the China virus, where it's not just happening inside the United States, but even across the world. Like some of that xenophobia is like slipping in, and people are starting to treat people differently, And I think this should be a really great lesson for us that we've got to believe that, we're all in it together. And at this point, it's not even an American conflict. It's a world conflict to fight this crisis. It's nobody's fault. We just got to figure out how to work together and solve it.
Amen, man. Amen. A big thing here, I would repeat the same thing. We've seen this throughout history. Japanese Americans immediately rushed to those that had power or had influence after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. When people said, "Oh, we can't trust Arab people, like we can't trust them," it came out. That verbiage came out. People said those things, and Japanese Americans rushed to tell, people of power, "Hey, like, remember when you did this to us? You said it was bad. Like, we don't do it." And I think that really did help and quelled some of the fear. You have to be reflective of your mistakes. One of the things that I always kid about is when kids ask me, what do we learn in history? It said the only thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history. And that was one time where that statement got proven wrong. So next week, Barker, you got the topic, man.
This is from a coworker of ours. She said, you guys need to lighten up a little bit and not do stuff that's so serious. So we're going to do the history of toilet paper. We're going to keep it as PG as possible. It can kind of be a sticky subject. So one last thing about this is when these soldiers return to Hawaii, they actually are instrumental in Hawaii obtaining statehood because they're so outspoken. They go against that kind of cultural norm of the nail that sticks up gets beaten down. They're like, no, we're going to stand up for ourselves because that's what the Japanese mentality is. You're going to get beaten down. And in America, it was like, no, you have to stand up and you have to speak your mind to be, taken care of. Some great resources if you're interested in more learning about the Japanese internment is the Densho Project or the Kin Korematsu Institute. I had the honor of going to a Korematsu Institute training last year in Spokane. Really great stuff, videos, pictures, more information. So if you're curious about that, check out those two sites. If you have questions, put it. We can send you a link in the comments.
Awesome. All right. Until next week, I'm Turn.
I'm Bark.
We're going to be here for a long time. Good night.
Be safe.
Stay healthy.